All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a different type of journey through the spiritual paradise that is Jehovah's Witnesses, allegedly. Sarcasm is mine. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, raised a Jehovah's Witness through the 70s, 80s, and into adulthood. Into the 90s, became an elder, and it is my quick look or my personal opinion or experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I want to welcome everyone in and thank everyone for the fantastic emails, private messages, DMs, suggestions, you name it. All are under consideration. I just want to thank everyone as they continue to really introduce me to new friends as well as reconnect with old friends, which is really, really cool and a lot of fun, particularly for those that have also left Jehovah's Witnesses like myself. I have been out for about 13 years. I'll give my typical preamble. Raised again as a teenager in the 70s and 80s. So I want to tackle a subject that we started last week, and I think that we're just going to get out of the way and continue this week. I've received a lot of private messages on this and emails, and I figured, you know what? Let's just get this out of the way. We'll bookend this subject. I want to take a look at Jehovah's Witnesses and sex, part 2. And no joke, we're going to take a look at what this God-chosen organization, or so they claim, has done to people that are married. We're going to take a look at a subject that continues to baffle me, even though I've been gone for 13, 14 years, continues to stun and amaze me that at any point they thought they had the right or the insight to comment on. And that subject matter is oral sex as well as anal sex, or how about just anything that goes on in the bedroom rather, of two consenting married adults. But this group, the 8 guys in upstate New York, feel like they have some pretty special insights on this subject. So, as always, trigger warning. Can we talk about Jehovah's Witness view of sex 2 weeks in a row? Is it over the top? We're just going to get it out of the way. We'll come back to this subject off and on since they are inherently obsessed with this subject. But I realize that it's polarizing. I realize that sex can make many people uncomfortable, the mere subject of it. What causes that? We won't go into it this time in the interest of time. But I recognize that it's not the most comfortable subject. There may be other things that interest you. But last week, we looked at how the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has been climbing into bed with consenting adults, those that are unmarried and those that are actually married. And they've been doing this for decades, as you will come to see. I didn't go into too much detail, but we did take a look at the history of their current definition of fornication, or porneia. There's a word that probably rings a bell for some of us in the last 20, 30 years, including the fact that this word porneia and what it encompasses has completely changed, added, taken away, and defined the sex lives, again, of consenting adults. It came into prominence mostly in the 70s and 80s. They really started to dig down on this subject of porneia coming out of the 60s. So the subsequent decades saw the governing body, led allegedly by Jesus, as they claim, feeling that it was time to start commenting on this subject. As I said in last week's episode, 90% of the judicial meetings I was a part of had something to do with sex. It almost always was fornication, which by definition is sex outside of marriage. But it did obviously start to stray into adultery, which is sex involving a married person with someone other than their mate. We'll discuss adultery and the crazy experiences surrounding that at some point down the road. But I want to issue, as I started to state, a trigger warning that if you're new to this podcast, you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're a PMO, or you're someone just exploring, just know that all the commentary, all the sarcasm, the humor, the sometimes juvenile, immature humor that comes with this subject is all mine. host. And it's just a way of how I deal with this subject and how really, to be honest, I find it absurd and it's ridiculous on so many levels. But as you'll see, it's also, and why we're talking about it, it's also been so damaging and destructive to even comment on what goes on in two people's bedroom. So, with that said, we're going to take a deeper look at this subject of sexuality among Jehovah's Witnesses, but this is going to be something that may shock a few people. We're going to take, by request, I've received very interesting messages and requests to tackle this subject from some, and it's one that's always been absurd in my book, as you'll come to see. We're going to tackle the governing body's commentary surrounding oral and anal sex, not between unmarried people, two consenting adults. Oh no. We're going to tackle this subject of oral and anal sex between married people, two consenting heterosexual adults, because as you know, homosexuality is absolutely vilified by Jehovah's Witnesses, subject for an episode down the road. We're going to take a look at a man and a woman married among Jehovah's Witnesses. And you heard that right. How the governing body feels without any basis that they have some sort of authority or power to start telling people how, when, and where they can touch. Now, if you're thinking, what? What are you saying, Stacy? Let me assure you, you're not alone. If you're new to this being a thing or an issue or even a subject among Jehovah's Witnesses, you are definitely not alone. I bet many listening didn't know that their marriage vows included 8 guys in upstate New York. They'll climb into bed with you, they'll get between you, they'll tell you how to touch, they'll tell you how to do everything, not as an unmarried person, which finds its roots in the Bible, another subject, but between married people, heterosexual married people, which is all that is allowed among Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, if you're stumbling upon this subject, this podcast episode, and it's just too uncomfortable, trust me, I understand. It's going to be interesting to walk through it, to be really honest with you. So I want to issue a disclaimer. This is not to be tawdry. This is not to talk about sex. This is not to make lots of funny jokes. This isn't something that I take necessarily lightly, although I'm going to have humor and sarcasm and my own juvenile immaturity through this. I'll keep it to a minimum. But it's truly to take a look at 4 things that I think are absolutely critical for a Jehovah's Witness or someone associated with them or anybody who has an interest in what they do to take a look at. 4 things. Here's the 4 things as to why we're even going to mention the subject of oral sex between married people. Number 1, I personally believe that this subject, along with many others, which are the subject of this podcast, give people insight into why Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult. They are a cult, and I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. Number 2, this subject of oral sex will give you an absolutely shining glimpse into how the governing body, the 8 guys in upstate New York, the quote-unquote faithful and discreet slave, completely and regularly dismiss the Bible. You know, the very book they claim only they can interpret, only they received from Jehovah and his son Jesus. That without them, you can't even understand it correctly. It's in print. But how they go on to take this book and completely ignore plainly stated commands and principles in their own Bible. And this subject of oral sex between married people is a fantastic example of how they do it. Number 3, how sexuality is one of many private, very private decisions in a person's life that they feel they need to regulate. They need to control. They need to insert themselves in. Imagine that. Give that some thought as you walk through this. They feel like they have a right to tell you as a married couple what you can and can't do sexually in your bedroom. And number 4, which is deadly serious in my opinion, how this subject, as an example, this one subject of oral sex, anal sex, or anything else between married people has literally destroyed lives. It's destroyed individuals. It's destroyed relationships. It's destroyed marriages. It has destroyed families, kids that were involved that felt the ripple effect of the governing body telling married people how they can touch each other in the privacy of their own bedroom. So, to be respectful, if being candid about sex is uncomfortable for you, just be forewarned. Trigger warning is out there. I try to give perspective to an issue that is really no one's damn business, but more importantly, to add some humor, some sarcasm, some personal experiences. No, not my own personal experiences with the subject, okay? Don't click off that dial, but rather my personal experiences as an elder to give some additional insight into how this formed, where it came from, and warning, like last week, my own brand of humor is likely to find its way in. I do this very organically and off the cuff, so to speak. So there it goes, long-winded trigger warning and what we're looking for as to why 8 guys in upstate New York that you will likely never meet or have never met are now sitting at the foot of your bed, taking notes as to what you, a man and a woman, can do in your bedroom. So let's talk about sex between 2 married consulting adults. And yes, I just want to say, to set the tone, the governing body claims that Jesus Christ has a vested interest in how you make love. He's watching, he has an interest in what you're doing, and they're going to direct you on what you can and can't do. So, as is the case with all things governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, hypocrisy reigns. It just reigns. Or we could say it's forgetfulness, or you might want to call it new light, old light, or if you're really logically minded and linear thinking, you might just say, no, these are reading comprehension issues. I'm going to let you be the judge as we tackle this subject. So, as we launch into the subject of getting busy as married people, consider this gem from the faithful and discreet slave, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, as an overarching thought as to everything you hear me say in this episode following this quote. This quote is from the Watchtower of 2016, the study edition. It says, quote, although the Bible does not provide specific rules about the kinds and limits of love play that might be associated with natural sexual intimacy, it mentions displays of affection. Christian marriage partners should treat each other with tenderness, end quote. The first sentence is the key one. Although the Bible does not provide specific rules about the kinds and limits of love play that might be associated with natural sexual intimacy, it does mention displays of affection. Watchtower of 2016 Study Edition. So let that sink in. They know, they have knowledge. They openly admit that this isn't from Jehovah God, or that Jehovah just neglected to mention you could get a fireball at Armageddon because you and your wife enjoyed orally pleasuring one another. No, they openly admit it doesn't come from there. They admit Jesus didn't give them a message via Holy Spirit or God magic, nor did he comment on it during his entire ministry. You will not find it. Don't bother unless you really want to. No. This subject of oral and by extension, anal sex is a perfect example of how the governing body comes up with doctrines, rules, dark clouds that hang over entire congregations of people, and most specifically couples, as if their teaching of generations, which has changed 6 times in the last few decades, 6 times, wasn't absurd enough. They got in a room and started a conversation on how married people make love. Let that sink in. So here we go. Keep that admission in mind as you consider the following history of rules surrounding oral and anal sex among married Jehovah's Witnesses, males and females, which is all that's approved, heterosexual marriage mates. Here's a quick timeline that we're going to untackle here on this tawdry subject. Having oral sex with your husband and wife was a disfellowshipping offense in 1974. That is correct. They could wipe you out, take you away from your families, all your friends, everything you knew, disfellowship you in 1974 for what you were doing privately in your bedroom as a married couple. Then Jesus apparently had a change of heart because, again, they claim it comes from him. It was no longer a disfellowshipping offense in 1978. I was a kid during all this, and I can assure you I had no idea what oral sex even was in 1974, or probably not even in 1978, if I'm being honest. Sixth grade? Yeah, I had no idea. But by some miracle, once again, having oral sex with your marriage partner became a disfellowshipping offense in 1983. Ah, yes, this article was the one I grew up on, and that it literally was the only tool I had to reference as an elder when this subject came up. And now, fast forward to more modern times, despite the quote I just read you from the Watchtower from 2016, it's become an entirely vague subject. Since about 2007, 2011, in that time frame, they only really refer to it when it comes to fornication. No more mention of a husband and wife, two grown consenting adults married to one another. And this is something that is common among the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses and the religion as a whole. They simply turn a blind eye. They try to pretend it doesn't exist. You've seen this with other teachings. You've seen it. They've done it with 1914. They've done it with generations. They've done it with the entire decades-long commentary on living in the last days. They just stop talking about it. They don't talk about the United Nations as much as they used to. It's a very subtle form of brainwashing that these guys do in upstate New York. So something that tore apart families, disfellowshipping in 74, no longer disfellowshipping in 78, once again disfellowshipping in 1983, and since then, let's go to Starbucks and have a coffee break. No one wants to talk about it. But that is not to minimize that for decades, and even today, there is still a stigma. Now, we're going to look at each of these nuggets of life or death wisdom, but imagine believing you should comment on what married adults do when they get naked. Imagine the mindset. I am much more interested in nuance, so that's what I highlight. Imagine the thought process that went into this. Let's get in a room and talk about this. I immediately think of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11, and apparently they don't, which says, quote, from the New World Translation, their doctored Bible, make it your aim to live quietly and to mind your own business. 1 Corinthians 4:11, end quote. Mind your own business. They've already stated this isn't in the Bible. It wasn't part of God, magic, or Holy Spirit. It didn't come to them from Jesus. They've literally almost subliminally or subconsciously bled out that they're commenting on what two married people do in the privacy of their bedroom, and it didn't come from anywhere. So even worse, you will see a distinct theme that I believe deserves its own commentary, its own episode at some point. They constantly and consistently comment on things never mentioned by the Bible or by Jesus, who they claim is the leader of this congregation, and using them personally to save the entire planet, every man, woman, and child. They do it all the time. And this will be a commentary unto itself. But this matter of oral sex between married, consenting adults, baptized Jehovah's Witnesses, is one of the most glaring examples of how they abuse power, how they have no right, how they insert themselves in people's minds, in their psyches, create guilt, shame, and fear. Apparently, they missed the memo from the Apostle Paul in their Bible, 1 Corinthians 4:6, which says, "Now, brothers, these things I have applied to myself and Apollos for your good, that through us you may learn the rule." Quote, "Do not go beyond the things that are written." End quote. 1 Corinthians 4:6. It's really hard for this guy to believe that there wasn't one man, one person in these meetings back in Brooklyn at the time and now in upstate New York that didn't stand up, bang the big conference table, and say, "Hey, guys, listen, this is definitely going beyond the things written." Or, "I'm pretty sure two naked married adults have been doing this for a long time." Or, "Noah didn't start having children until he was 500 years old. Do you think he and Mrs. Noah might have been doing this instead?" You get the idea. The rule in itself is unbelievable, but the fact that grown men got in a room without any scriptural basis or any magical appearance from Jesus himself and decided to comment on oral sex between married people is simply mind-blowing. But nope, not one. Not one of those guys. And this started hitting the printed pages as far back as 1969, before there was even a governing body. So, who was Jesus giving the message to? Never mind. As you can see, you can literally go off in hundreds of directions with something as private as this subject. I've never wanted to find myself on this podcast or in life in general wasting 1 minute continuing to read Jehovah's Witness publications. I did that for several years after I stopped being an elder for myself. But unfortunately, this subject of oral sex between married people demands it. As I've stated, they've been mostly silent on this subject since about 2007, where they really only refer to it from that year forward as something that is really wrong between unmarried people. But they haven't really commented on the married person thing yet. That last comment is really still that March 83 Watchtower, which we will get to. But it's just like everything. It's like the blood fractions. It's like the last days. It's like 1914. It's like the United Nations. They hammered these points home for decades and then simply walk away from them when somebody realizes they probably shouldn't even be talking about it. And they just hope that no one notices or that no one's really paying attention to what they're saying or doing. So let's tackle it comment by comment from the 8 guys in upstate New York who felt that they had some sort of right without the Bible, without Jesus' direction, without Jehovah, without literally anything, nothing, that they had the right to start commenting on whether married people should be having oral sex in their bedroom. So I'm going to dive in. I take you back to the first mention, really, from my standpoint in the literature, which is 1969. Yes, juvenile joke incoming. Is 69 a coincidence? I don't know, but I'm going to call it out because it seems absolutely absurd and very strange that the year 69 is where we decided to start commenting on oral sex between married people. I'm truly sorry if that offends you, but let's be honest, that's pretty strange. And this conversation of oral sex began to happen over several years. It began to really almost develop, which from my standpoint, I've always wondered, who was it? Was it 1 or 2 guys on the governing body that, how did this even become a subject? Were their wives not wanting to do it and they were upset? Were they wanting to do it and they were upset? Were they wanting to participate in this with their wives and suddenly the wife thought it was dirty, or the wife wanted it and it wasn't good? I mean, you could go a million different ways, but it clearly did not come from the Almighty Creator. as they've openly said. As they openly said. So let's take a look at this. Starting in 1969, having oral sex within your marriage in the privacy of your own home became a disfellowshipping offense. And I hate quoting a bunch of their garbage literature, but I feel like I have to present this platform as to how absurd this developed. So in the Watchtower of 1969, December 15th, pages 765 and 766, it made this comment. I can't get over that this happened in 69. It's just crazy. Quote, some have contended, however, that absolutely anything done between a husband and wife is permissible. However, that view is not supported in the Bible. In Romans 1, 24 through 32, where it speaks of both men and women who participated in immoral sex practices, including lesbian and sodomite acts, the Bible mentions a natural use of the female. Thus, it shows that to indulge in such perverted use of the reproductive organs so as to satisfy a covetous desire for sexual excitement is not approved by God. This would also be true in connection with married couples. They should not pervert this natural use of the female. In many places, even the law of the land backs this up, making certain acts between husband and wife illegal. For example, speaking of the United States, as of August 8th, 1969, sodomy is illegal in nearly every state, even between spouses, end quote. Do you see the leap they make? Do you see the leap they make? They take the scripture in Romans chapter 1, 24 through 32, which is clearly speaking of homosexuality, which is a subject for its own show. They literally, in my opinion, Jehovah's Witnesses are hatefully, near hate crime going after homosexual and lesbians, which is disgusting. Subject for another show. But they take a subject matter that has nothing to do between a heterosexual married relationship, and they begin to say, well, that's just not a natural use. Based on what? From whom? Where does this even come from? This is clearly a personal opinion. It starting in 69 and throughout all of these references that I got to read. I apologize in advance just so you can see the development. Somebody clearly was either against it, wanted it, or had a problem with it. Between heterosexual people, they expected people to believe that in all of human history, no one had had oral sex in their married relationship. Or if they did, they were sinning against Jehovah. What? Where? I made a joke about Noah and Mrs. Noah earlier. I don't know how Noah avoided having children without, the local 7-Eleven contraceptives. And I made a joke that maybe they partook in this for 500 years before Noah and Mrs. Noah wanted to have kids. Look, I don't believe Noah ever existed. I realize I'm being sarcastic. But the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses expects you to believe that no one, no man or woman who were just passionately in love with each other, who enjoyed time together alone in privacy, again, they're not doing this on a stage, that no one had ever found pleasure in oral sex between two married people before. And that if they did, they were bad people. And so it continues. The Watchtower of 1972, December 1st, pages 734 to 736, in what is a wonderful ongoing glimpse of Holy Spirit called Questions from Readers. If you've been around a while, you will recognize, oh yes, the questions from readers. And I always wondered how they chose these, because some of them were just fantastic, others were not. But here's one. So they make this blanket comment in 1969, and in 72, I could just imagine the mailbags being dragged into Bethel in Brooklyn of people going, wait, what? My wife and I, or my husband and I, really love each other. We enjoy this. What? So you can just imagine where this questions from the readers, debatable whether it ever came from outside the building, where it came from. But in 1972, December 1st, it makes this comment. And forgive me for the long-winded reading. It says, quote, "It is not our purpose." I'm sorry. Listen to this and just bang your head on a table because it's just stunning what they try to do to thinking people with this commentary. I digress. Quote, "It is not our purpose to attempt to draw a precise line as to where what is natural ends and what is unnatural begins. But we believe that, notice not Jehovah, not Jesus, not the Bible. We believe that by meditating on Bible principles, a Christian should at least be able to discern what is grossly unnatural. In other areas, the Christian's individual conscience will have to guide, and this includes the questions regarding caresses and love play prior to intercourse." What? Someone sat down to write, "I'm going to tell you what foreplay should look like. I'm going to tell you how you can caress, if you can grab, pinch, bite, softly touch." What? Back to the quote, "But even here, the Christian who wants to produce the fruits of God's Holy Spirit will wisely avoid practices that approach or could easily lead one to fall into unnatural forms of copulation." Again, here are 8 guys in a room sitting down to go, let's teach them how they should touch each other. What in the world constitutes unnatural forms of copulation, since it's nowhere commented on anywhere in the scriptures? And I'm very certain Jesus didn't turn his mind and eye away from worldwide famine, disease, and destruction on a massive level in the 70s and 80s to give some real direct, direction on oral sex in a bedroom between married people. But they want us to believe he did. They're now telling people what foreplay should look like in 72. And here's more irony. Quote, back to the quote. "It is certainly not the responsibility of elders or any others in a Christian congregation to search into the private lives of married couples. Nevertheless, if future cases of gross unnatural conduct, such as the practice of oral or anal copulation, are brought to their attention, the elders should act to try to correct the situation before further harm results, as they would do with any other serious wrong. Their concern is, of course, to try to help those who go astray and are caught in the snare of the devil. But if persons willfully show disrespect for Jehovah's God marital arrangements, then it becomes necessary to remove them from the congregation as dangerous leaven that could contaminate others." People. End quote, I might add. Watchtower 72, December 1st. Go check it out. First, who in their right mind is running around the congregation talking about the oral sex they had with their husband or wife? If it comes to the knowledge of the elders, it's not their responsibility to regulate, but if we hear about it, we're coming into your bedroom. Did you ever hear of this in your time as a Jehovah's Witness, or do you hear of it now as a Jehovah's Witness? Were you out in the car group on Saturday morning and someone just drops the story of the hot oral sex they had with their mate the night before into the car group conversation? Jehovah's Witnesses gossip and slander like true professionals, trust me. But I can tell you that in my 40 plus years as a Jehovah's Witness, I never heard this one. "Hey, Stacy, let me tell you what we did last night." It's incredible. But what you are seeing is the subtlety by which the governing body brainwashes its people. How you know it's a cult. They begin to shame and guilt people on how they should touch each other, what their caresses should be, that they're not going to bust down the door during sex to take a look. But oh boy, if you hear about this, by the way, you should tell us. It's a very subtle thing. You should tell us if you know of anyone having oral sex as a married couple. Then we will try to correct it before Satan kills them. They are disregarding the marital arrangement. What? There is no basis scripturally. There is nothing, absolutely nothing to support this take by the governing body. Second, and I guess I got ahead of myself. I'm going to be honest. I'm rambling now. Once again, where is this established in the Bible? That that oral sex between two married consenting heterosexual adults is wrong? That they're in the snare of the devil, that they are disregarding Jehovah's marital arrangement? Romans 1:24 through 27, which they love to throw at this subject, is pointed to. We covered it in a few minutes ago. And while, again, it's an entirely separate subject, it's discussing homosexuality. It is not discussing married heterosexual people enjoying one another in lovemaking. It is not. It's not discussing their attitude, their passion, nothing. It is not mentioned. Let me read it to you so you can see this. Romans 1:26 and 27. I'll read two from the New World Translation that they use to support this ridiculous line of reasoning that has nothing to do with it. It says, quote, "That is why God gave them over to disgraceful sexual passion. For their females changed the natural use of themselves into one contrary to nature. Likewise, also the males left the natural use of the female and became violently inflamed in their lust toward one another, males with males, working what is obscene and receiving in themselves the full penalty which was due for their error." End quote. Romans 1:26 and 27. There is no mention of married people. There's no mention of a man and a woman. The Apostle Paul, in his own misogyny and homophobia, was clearly mentioning hatred for homosexuality, not married people. But it just gets worse. Because not only could they tell you how and what to do, they can punish you for it. They can take away your life, everything you know. And this is going to be long-winded. I apologize. I'll try to give the highlights. But the Watchtower of 1974, so you can see the progression, 1969, 1972, 1974 now, November 15th, page 704, makes this comment. And I'm just going to hit the high points because I could read and read and it's going to put you to sleep. But here are some of the comments just taken from that snapshot. Please go look it up. Do not take my word for it. It makes comments such as this: "There are times when lewd practices within the marriage arrangement would provide a basis for a scriptural divorce. You can now divorce your mate as of 1974 if they enjoy oral sex or they have a request for anal sex. How you feel about that is irregardless. How I feel about it is irregardless. If one mate wants it, you can now divorce them for it. Of course, the Holy Scriptures do not encourage divorce, nor do they command the innocent party to divorce a mate who engages in gross sexual perversion." Blah, blah, blah. In the common Greek in which Jesus' words are recorded, the term fornication is porneia. Once again, fornication between unmarried people is being compared to married people. And it includes immoral sexual relations, perversions, and lewd practices such as might be carried on in a house of prostitution, including oral and anal copulation. Porneia can rightly be considered as including perversions within the marriage arrangement. No, folks, it cannot. Porneia is fornication. It's between two unmarried people. But they make this leap because these 8 guys in a room, whether it was one man's opinion or someone else's, suddenly was railing against oral sex between a man and a woman in a marriage arrangement. And they suddenly lump it in with fornication, things that could happen in a house of prostitution. My first thought as a kid was, wait a minute, are they calling a man's wife a prostitute? This doesn't even make sense. As to Jesus, back to the article, as to Jesus' statements about divorce, they do not specify with whom fornication or porneia is practiced. They leave the matter open. The porneia can rightly be considered as including perversions within the marriage arrangement. What? In that a man who forces his wife to have unnatural sex with relations with him in effect prostitutes or debauches her. I want to comment on the fact that oral sex is enjoyable for the man and the woman if done correctly. I'm going to be careful and try to be classy here. But this is, of course, they're very much railing against men who are apparently in 1974 asking their wives to mix this into their sex life, to liven it up. It goes on to state this makes him guilty of porneia, fornication, because somehow 2 married people are now unmarried and getting involved in things that are in houses of prostitution, again, as if a married person never thought, well, that looks good, or that looks good. Let's try this with my mouth, or as if that never happened in all of human history. Suddenly in 74, it's a big deal. It says, if such, it goes on to say, I might add, if on the other hand, the lewd practices were engaged in by mutual consent, in other words, I want to do this to you and I want you to do it to me, and isn't this amazing? We love each other. Neither mate would have a basis for claiming pornea as a scriptural ground for divorce. Wait, what? So if one wants it and one doesn't, it's pornea? If they both want it, it's not pornea? Quote, this is so because neither party is innocent and seeking freedom from a mate guilty of pornea. Both marriage partners are now guilty. Such a case, if brought to the attention of the elders in the congregation, would be handled like any other serious wrongdoing. They could be disfellowshipped. It's staggering, but it gives you an incredible look at how the governing body operates and the control that they attempt to have. Aside from trying to control married people in their own bedrooms, you have to be able to see how they operate, how they make assertive statements with zero proof or foundation, as if oral sex was somehow only taking place in whorehouses throughout history. They make the statement as if it's a fact, and Jehovah's Witnesses gobble it up. They accepted it. They began to feel guilt, shame. They began to wreck their relationships. They began to have problems in their marriages. 1976, they go on to quote, February 15th, pages 122 and 123, unnatural practices in connection with sex and marriage, such as oral and anal copulation, have caused some of God's people to become impure in his eyes. But the watchtower kept above this morass of filth by alerting married couples to God's thinking on the matter. End quote. Watchtower 76, February 15th. Yes, they're saving us all from ourselves. They're saving married couples who love each other, who enjoy healthy sex in the privacy of their own bedroom, from themselves. Unnatural practices in connection with sex and marriage, such as oral and anal copulation, have made them impure in Jehovah's eyes. Guilt, shame, destruction. Make no bones about it. It's not 1976 anymore. But this was a very real thing, and people were being disfellowshipped for it. People were seeking divorces for it. But it just gets better. On this issue of oral or anal sex, or what you can do in your bedroom, as you can see in 1976, it was a morass of filth. Jehovah's no longer loves you. You're tainted. You can be disfellowshipped for this. But just 4 years later, in the February 15th, 1978 Watchtower, pages 30 through 32, they back away from this being a disfellowshipping offense. Suddenly now, as we stated and prefaced in every comment where we said we could disfellowship you, we shouldn't be involved in this, it's none of our business, but if we hear of it, or if you come tell us about it, then we're going to form a judicial committee. In 1978, that goes out the window. Suddenly, without any explanation, something that had destroyed families, broken up marriages, caused husband and wife to have problems amongst themselves, suddenly went completely out the window. It says this without reading the whole reference. It's pages 30 and 32, Watchtower 78, February 15th. It says, in view of the absence of clear scriptural instruction, you think? These are matters for which the married couple themselves must bear the responsibility before God, and that these marital intimacies do not come within the province of the congregational elders to attempt to control nor to take disfellowshipping action with such matters as the sole basis. They flat out once again come full circle, so you know there was another voice in that room. There was someone else who spoke up. And they say, wait a minute, we really shouldn't be commenting on what two men and women do in the privacy of their bedroom. There's no scriptural basis. There's no foundation in the Bible. So again, why are we talking about a subject that really most people are uncomfortable about? Because it's a fantastic example of how the governing body or the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses come up with doctrines and rules that impact the lives of other people. And then they just go, oopsie, never mind, just kidding. Jesus had a change of heart. He just sent us a memo. He just called my cell phone. They just go off and completely disclaim it. Never do they address in 1978 the damage they did in 1976, 1974, 1972, 1969, or the people that were affected. But let me assure you of something, listeners. People were affected. Marriages, something that was intimate and private, had nothing to do with this religion. They weaseled their way in and broke up families because of sexual preference. But then it just gets better. And here's the reference that impacted my life tremendously, because by this point, I'm through puberty, I'm in high school, and this was the only, and remains quite candidly, the only real strong foundational reference within their literature to this matter of oral and anal sex between married people. And might I add, it's from the Watchtower of 1983, March 15th, page 31. In 1978, really sorry about that. Sorry about your busted up families. And sorry about, the sisters in the car group that were talking about oral sex and came to us. Sorry about all that. It's none of our business after all. 5 years later, guess what? Jesus picked up the phone, or there was more Holy Spirit, and it came in bigger amounts. Suddenly, it was back to being a heinous crime between married people, and you will and can be disfellowshipped for it. And at this point in my life and my experience, I was old enough to tell you it happened. Families and marriages were destroyed on this subject. And I dealt with it as an elder. So, Watchtower of 83, March 15th, page 31. These are the references that continue to be, for lack of any other real mention since then, the foundation for what two married people do in their marriage as being dirty, awful, and worthy of disfellowshipping if we find out about it. I'm going to read a little bit more on this one. It says, quote, "What though if one mate wants or even demands to share with his or her partner in what is clearly a perverted sex practice?" Again, clearly a perverted, where? Where? If you believe in Adam and Eve, I respect that. I do not. But you mean to tell me Adam and Eve with perfect bodies and perfect minds didn't go, hey there, and try this? But somewhere along the way, it became a perverted sex practice, according to this. Back to the article. The above presented facts show that porneia involves unlawful sexual conduct outside the marital arrangement. That is correct, folks. Fornication/porneia. However, back to article, quote, "Thus a mate's enforcing perverted acts such as oral or anal sex within the marriage would not constitute a basis for a divorce that would leave either free for remarriage. Even though a believing mate is distressed by the situation, most are not, yet that one endeavors to hold the scriptural principles will result in a blessing from Jehovah." Oh, okay. Jehovah, again, is in our bedrooms watching us. I won't go into that, or how creepy that is, or how it relates to pornography, or many other things. But Jehovah is now going to bless you if you refuse your husband or your wife the pleasure that two married people who are devoted to each other can give it only each other, only you two. Jehovah's going to bless you if you say, nope, not comfortable with that. Back to article. In such cases, it may be helpful for the couple to discuss the problem frankly, bearing in mind especially that sexual relations should be honorable, wholesome, an expression of tender love. Blah, blah, blah. As already stated, it is not for the elders to police the private marital matters of couples in the congregation. However, one of their favorite words, however, and evidently, however, if it becomes known that a member of the congregation is practicing or openly advocating perverted sex relations, their definition of oral or anal sex, within the marriage bond, that one certainly would not be irreprehensible and so would not be acceptable for special privileges such as serving as an elder, a ministerial servant, or a pioneer. Such practice and advocacy could even lead to expulsion from the congregation. 1983, March 15th, page 31, Watchtower. They go on to give one more dig in 1986 in the True Peace book on page 150, where it makes this blanket comment, quote, "The inspired Bible writer did not have to explain the natural way in which the reproductive organs of husband and wife complement each other. Homosexual relations obviously cannot follow this natural way. So male and female homosexuals employ other forms of intercourse in what the Apostle Paul refers to as disgraceful sexual appetites and obscene practices. Could married couples imitate such homosexual forms of intercourse in their own marriage and still be free in God's eyes from expressing disgraceful sexual appetites or hurtful desire?" End quote. They make the massive leap between two same-sex couples who may or may not be married. At that time, they were not married. It was not common in the 80s. And they apply them to a heterosexual relationship. No scriptural basis, no foundation, no command from Jehovah, no command from Jesus, no command from anyone. And they can throw you out of the congregation for what you're doing privately in your bedroom with one another. Okay? This is why I say, why cover a subject like this when it's probably not the most comfortable one for most people? Because it gives you an incredible snapshot into these people in New York, those 8 guys, now considered the faithful and discreet slave, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. They know they can't police this. They can't bust down doors and jump into your bedroom, or if you're, having a quickie somewhere or whatever the case may be. They know they can't regulate that. So they plant guilt. They plant shame. They ask leading questions like, do you really think Jehovah approves of you doing that? Because that's what homosexuals do. As if a heterosexual couple can't find pleasure, no matter how you feel on this subject, whether you're a fan of it or not. That's not what this is about. This is about people telling you how you can and can't live your life with zero basis in the Bible or from the God that they claim exists. Nothing. Zero. Do you honestly believe that if Jehovah thought your name had a fireball on it at Armageddon because you stayed loyal to a man or woman, you pleasured them in what was a beautiful, wonderful experience, and also just not a big deal from my standpoint, that you deserve to die? You deserve to be thrown outside the congregation, lose your family, your friends, and everything because you did this privately between 2 people? What? It's so absurd that I literally can't wrap my head around it all these years later. So where are we today? That 83 reference was a huge one, and it's where they basically stopped talking about the subject. 1983, as if oral sex has dropped off the scene between a man and a woman. They suddenly have, like they do many subjects, walked away quietly. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They haven't mentioned it. It's life or death. You can be thrown out of the congregation for it if you're married. And if we find out about it, again, are you in a car group having coffee and you drop this on your friends? What? What? Who does that? It's just incredible. And now suddenly it's, by their standards, a life and death thing between 2 married people, but they don't talk about it anymore. They don't offer any counsel, alternatives, or anything else. Apparently, Jehovah stopped talking about it in 1983. Since 2007, and again in 2011, they really only mention oral or anal sex when they mention fornication and unmarried people. Once again, employing their age-old strategy of backing away from things and hoping no one notices. Why? Now, this is strictly my opinion, but this is my opinion, but with older governing body members dying, governing body helpers becoming a real thing, which are typically younger, some as my age or younger now, are helping the writing committee, the service committee, the governing body themselves. With those helpers entering the scene, as well as the many numerous conversations privately I had with other elders during my time as an elder on this subject, most of those people are probably enjoying some great oral sex in their marriages. I'm not going to get into anal. I don't care how you feel about it. It's your business, none of mine. Oral sex comes pretty naturally between a man and a woman. Uh, when it doesn't, it's because that's just your taste, or maybe you've dealt with a lifetime of shame surrounding it. I don't know. But why has this kind of dropped by the wayside and fallen off the cliff, so to speak? I personally believe it's because most of the people now engaged have spoken some sense in the room and went, yeah, we probably shouldn't comment on that, while keeping it very private that they got some last night. That's my belief on it, as crass as that sounds. This subject they backed away from in 1983, and they never comment on it anymore. So guess what? Probably not a disfellowshipping offense. I can tell you now, as an elder in the 90s and 2000s, this subject would come up from time to time in my congregation. It wasn't common. I don't want to, make this a salacious conversation like, oh God, everyone's having oral sex and talking about it. They weren't. And that's mostly because most married adults don't feel the need to tell anyone else, most especially the elders, what they're doing in their bedrooms. And I will state this, as I've stated on past episodes, the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses don't study. They don't read their own literature. Most have never read the Bible. Not kidding. They can stand by a cart now and just look at their cell phone. They don't even need to teach anymore. So they haven't taught themselves. So many of them have no clue that oral sex or anal, which is typically still seen as a little raw, even in our age, mostly attached to pornography or really edgy people, they don't see this as even being a conversation or an issue for married people. You may be listening right now going, what? What, Stacy? Wait a minute. What? You read those references from our literature? Yes. This was a big deal. And I can't highlight enough that I think that the reason it is not a big deal now is because the vast majority practice it. Even among Jehovah's Witnesses, they just don't talk about it. They're certainly not writing in for questions from the readers to ask, hey, really like this. But it would come up in my time as an elder. It really would. Someone, and I have to be candid here, sharing my own experiences, usually a married sister would get wind of this rule somehow. They'd read it, or somebody would say something. They'd go look it up in the library. Or if I'm honest, that sister or that woman, I can remember experiences where the husband was overly demanding about that part of their sex life and would approach an elder to talk about it, which I still think is insane. They probably got off easy with me. That sounded terrible. They probably left a meeting with me no worse for the wear, because I just don't feel this is anyone's business on any level. There's no biblical foundation for it. But a sister would come forward and want to talk to the elders, and it was brutal. It was brutal for most elders, who, I might add, the body I served on for 11 years saw mostly a foundation of the same faces, but elders moving in and out. Again, I have to be candid. Most of the elders had sexless marriages. They weren't happy in that part of their married life or their relationship. So this was a tough subject when a sister came forward and went, oh my gosh, me and my husband, and here's the problem. And again, I guess I'm different. It doesn't make me uncomfortable now or even then to discuss it. It just doesn't. It's like eating, sleeping. It's part of the human experience. But imagine some of those elders having this conversation with a sister or a brother. My wife won't give me this. She won't go downstairs. I'm so unhappy. Or, I also need to be very candid here, and I'll be delicate as I can be. And please know that it's meant with respect, even with my sarcasm and humor. I want to mention some basic facts regarding human sexuality. And again, this is strictly knowledge. I stand to be corrected. I am a male. Okay. I am a male. I don't pretend to be a female. I'm a massive fan of women. I think they're stronger than us. Subject for another day. I think they put up with so much crap in that cult that it defies my brain. But here's a fact that I think I'm safe to say, and I hope I don't offend on any level. Some women simply can't enjoy sex to the fullest with just intercourse. So some sisters would literally feel guilty and ashamed that their husbands would be sure to that their wives enjoyed the experience, if you know what I'm saying, that they engaged in oral sex for the wife's sake. I'm not kidding. Women would feel shamed. Is it any wonder when you look at the Watchtower's literature and then claim that it's coming from Jehovah and Jesus? These were just a bunch of guys in upstate New York. Many would just give up on an enjoyable sex life. It never dawns on them that there is zero support for this rule. Zero. And as an elder, you really didn't come out and say that for the most part because you wanted to show support for the faithful slave. But, and more importantly, based on their beliefs in an almighty creator, in their belief that Jehovah did exist and he was watching and that he made them the way they are. And two naked people were never going to look at each other or get turned on and say, hey, how about we try this? How does that feel? Based on their anatomy alone? Just visuals? I'm trying to be delicate here. I'm really. But it was awful to deal with. And it happened. And let me tell you where I get downright serious. It's ruined marriages. It caused divorces. It ripped apart families where children were involved. Now, this doesn't happen as much anymore. I want to be candid because most JWs simply ignore this. They just don't even pay attention to it. I would venture to guess that most don't even know this is an issue, or they think it's urban myth. They've never read those references I just dropped on you. And they do what they want once they get married. They've been waiting a long time. They're super pent up. And most of them get married very young to avoid committing fornication. It doesn't happen as much anymore. I don't think this is big an issue, but for my generation and for those of us that have been around a while, this was massive. And in the 70s and the 80s, it happened a lot. A lot. And with all the joking and all the discomfort pushed aside, it destroyed families. It destroyed relationships that were otherwise healthy. Two people that loved each other and were doing absolutely nothing wrong. Zero. So I think we'll leave the subject alone now. We're going to leave it alone. I tried to keep it above board. I tried not to be too juvenile or immature, and I hope that it was comfortable to look at just from a strictly secular standpoint of Jehovah's Witnesses. But I want to go back to the very beginning, and I want to quote one of their favorite scriptures, Malachi 3:6, which says, "For I am Jehovah, I do not change." I am Jehovah, I do not change. Nonetheless, over the course of essentially 2, maybe a little less decades, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses felt like they could climb into bed with you. They can tell you how to enjoy each other, how to pleasure your wife or your husband, and that if they got wind of it, don't ask me how that's even possible outside of planting guilt in the minds of married people. They could literally throw you out of the congregation for this. It went from disfellowshipping in 69, 72, 74. Then it wasn't a disfellowshipping offense in 1978. And their last real comment in 1983 is that, yep, you can be disfellowshipped for this. If you're running around, in the car group or after the meeting going, hey, folks, I want to share with you what my wife and I did last night. If you're doing that, they can still disfellowship you. They can throw you out. Then the only reason this isn't still a massive issue among Jehovah's Witnesses is because most of the elders, especially in the younger age groups, are doing this. Most assuredly, the oral sex part with their marriage mates. It's happening. So everybody looks, I actually knew elders that were doing it. I remember conversations where I brought this up and thought, my God, who do we think we are? And they just wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I don't know. I'm doing it. I mean, I hate to be crass. All right, let's leave this alone. Enough. This has been a long-winded episode. There we go. We're going to move off this subject of sex, even though, let's face it, it is a massive umbrella among Jehovah's Witnesses. They're obsessed with it. They devote so much time, video, monetary investment, everything to making sure they regulate everyone's sex life. And there is, in my opinion, one of the most absurd and disgusting and damaging examples of it on this subject of what married people can do orally to one another in their marriages. I want to thank you for joining me. I know this one might not be a favorite, but I think, again, I want to highlight the fact that we don't do this because it's fun to talk about such subjects. But as I mentioned at the outset, those 4 things: why I believe they're a cult, how the governing body dismisses the Bible, how sex is a private issue, no one's business, and how, in the end, folks, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has inserted themselves in marriages, families, and destroyed them without provocation and without any foundation. Okay, I need to go drink another cup of coffee. I want to thank you for listening in on Surviving Paradise this week. Please keep the commentary coming, whether it's private in DMs and emails, or certainly YouTube. I certainly appreciate that. We appreciate all the likes, the subscribes. We appreciate the feedback. Feel like we're building almost a little community here of those of us that are healing or just still curious about one of the craziest time periods in our life. If you are a PMO, nothing but love to you. Nothing but respect for your bravery for listening to a podcast and educating yourself, and nothing but love. Hang in there. Thank you, folks. Appreciate all of you. We will see you again next week on Surviving Paradise. And I promise we'll tackle something new. Be well out there.